The room was quiet, though quiet in her world was never truly silent. Even in the stillness, the faint hum of a city that never forgave drifted through the windows like an accusation. Kim sat in the velvet darkness, staring at her own reflection in the glass, not quite sure whether she saw herself or the shadows of a woman she had become. Wealth surrounded her. The sprawling mansion, the empire of cosmetics, the dynasty built on her name, all of it whispered a cruel truth. None of this had come without a cost. A single decision had carved her path, and though the world envied her, she alone knew the price that decision demanded every night when the lights dimmed and the noise of admiration faded into silence. It wasn't the applause she remembered most. It was the silence afterward. The silence when her family slept and her own thoughts became unbearable company. The silence when she replayed the moment, the decision that defined her, chained her, and lifted her higher than she ever thought possible, only to leave her emptier than she ever imagined. The story did not begin in silk sheets or red carpets. It began in the shadows of obscurity, in a world where Kim Kardashian was just a name whispered behind someone else's fame. She was the daughter of Robert Kardashian, yes, but to the world she was background, a friend of Paris Hilton, a stylist, a girl moving in the periphery of someone else's light. She craved more, not for the sake of vanity alone, though vanity was always part of it. No, it was survival. In Los Angeles, you were either seen or erased, and Kim feared erasure more than failure. But the world doesn't hand fame to those who wait politely. It demands sacrifice. And in 2007, when a private tape surfaced, a tape that should have destroyed her, Kim faced a decision most would run from. She could fight, deny, bury the scandal in shame, retreat into the shadows forever. Or she could step forward, take control of the narrative, and weaponize the very thing meant to humiliate her. It was a choice that reeked of risk, a choice that could condemn her family's name or etch it into the cultural memory of an entire generation. She remembers that night, the night she sat with her mother, Kris Jenner, as they stared at the storm that was about to swallow them. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Lawyers, agents, reporters, panic choked the air. Kim was 27, unprepared for the scale of humiliation that had detonated around her. And yet, Kris leaned across the table, eyes hard as diamonds, and asked the question that still echoes in Kim's mind. Do you want to be destroyed, or do you want to be remembered? The weight of it was unbearable. It wasn't just about Kim anymore. She had sisters, a brother, a family tied to her name. To choose the path of silence meant shame, ridicule, and obscurity. To choose the other path meant ownership, empire, the possibility of greatness. But it also meant living with the knowledge that her rise had been built on scandal, on exploitation of her most private self. The human heart isn't made to carry such contradictions. But in that moment, ambition overpowered shame. She chose. She signed the papers. She allowed the scandal to breathe, to be reframed, to be turned into the ignition of a brand. And in that instant, the decision rewrote her fate. The cameras followed. A reality show was born, keeping up with the Kardashians. At first, it was a gamble, a spectacle, meant to exploit the family's notoriety before it evaporated. But the gamble grew into a phenomenon. Suddenly, Kim was no longer a side character in someone else's story. She was the story. The scandal that should have ruined her became the foundation of her empire. The world tuned in, not just to mock, but to obsess, to consume every detail of her family's life. And with each episode, the Kardashians tightened their grip on cultural relevance. But beneath the surface of glossy magazine covers and billion-dollar deals, Kim felt the fracture widening. Every success was haunted by the truth she could never erase. She had gambled her dignity for visibility, and though she had won beyond comprehension, the victory tasted of ash. At charity galas, when strangers smiled too wide, she knew what they remembered first. At business negotiations, even as men in suits addressed her with respect, she could see the shadow of judgment in their eyes. She carried both power and shame, and together they became her prison. Years later, when her cosmetics empire soared to valuations in the billions, when Forbes crowned her a billionaire, she should have felt invincible. But money doesn't silence ghosts. Instead, it amplifies them. At night, when her children slept and the empire rested, she found herself asking, had she built something lasting, or had she merely perfected the art of distraction? Her marriages carried the same weight of decision. Each union, each headline, each very public unraveling was a continuation of that first choice, to let the world consume her life as entertainment. With Kanye West, she tasted both ecstasy and torment. Together, they were worshipped and ridiculed in equal measure. Their love was a battlefield, one played out before millions of strangers who believed they had the right to judge every detail. And in the quiet aftermath of divorce, Kim once again confronted the truth. Every personal decision she made had become a public spectacle. Privacy was not a luxury she lost, it was a luxury she sold. There is a peculiar kind of loneliness that comes with being known by everyone, but understood by no one. Kim lived inside that loneliness. The world thought it knew her. They called her shallow, brilliant, manipulative, entrepreneurial. They wrote think pieces about her body, her influence, her fortune. But in the mirror at night, she saw only the girl who once sat across from her mother, terrified, ashamed, desperate for control. That girl had chosen empire over anonymity, and though she was worshipped for it, she had never stopped mourning the innocence she buried that day. Fame has a way of feeding itself. The more she gave, the more the world demanded. She could never stop performing, never step away, never return to a life of quiet simplicity. Because if she did, the empire would crumble, the family dynasty would collapse, and everything she had sacrificed would be for nothing. She was a queen locked in her own palace, adored and envied, but never free. Even now, as she stares into the darkness of her mansion, she can feel the weight of the decision pressing against her chest. If she had chosen differently, if she had fought the scandal and vanished into silence, who would she be today? Perhaps forgotten, perhaps ordinary, perhaps free. The thought is unbearable, and yet it is also intoxicating. Freedom, after all, is the one thing her wealth could never buy back. There are moments when she wonders if her children will one day look at her and see the empire or the scandal that built it. Will they inherit her legacy as power or as shame? She doesn't know. The thought keeps her awake long after the city outside has gone quiet. Because the truth is simple, brutal, and inescapable. One decision can make you, and the same decision can haunt you. Kim Kardashian lives as both proof and warning. And so, she sits in the silence, empire glowing around her, haunted by the memory of that single moment when she chose to weaponize shame, to turn humiliation into currency. A decision that gave her everything, and took something she can never reclaim. The night always seemed the same, too quiet to ignore, too heavy to escape. Kim would walk the marble halls of her home, the faint echo of her own footsteps reminding her that even the grandest empire could feel like a cage. She had money, power, influence that spanned continents, but in the dark, none of it silenced the question that gnawed at her. Was it worth it? She remembered the faces. Endless crowds screaming her name, flashes of cameras blinding her, reporters calling out questions not about her mind, not about her dreams, but about her body, her relationships, her private wounds dressed as entertainment. She had become more than a celebrity. She had become an object, a symbol, a screen onto which the world projected its desires and its hatred. It was intoxicating to hold that much attention, but the truth lingered underneath. She was no longer just a person. She was a brand. That was the real decision she had made all those years ago, not just to embrace scandal, but to surrender her humanity in exchange for immortality. A human could be forgotten, forgiven, allowed to grow in private. But a brand? A brand could never rest. A brand could never stumble. A brand had to be polished, packaged, monetized, until there was nothing left of the person beneath. She had perfected the art of performance. Every smile on Instagram, every scene in the reality show, every product launch was calculated. Behind the curtain, she was exhausted, broken at times, yet the machine had to keep moving. There was no pause button, because the second she stopped, the world would turn on her, call her irrelevant, discard her as quickly as it had consumed her. Fame was not a reward. It was a debt that demanded constant payment. And payment, for Kim, came in the form of her life. Every relationship she ever had became fodder for tabloids. Every heartbreak was dissected by strangers who felt entitled to her pain. Her marriage to Kanye was the pinnacle of that paradox. He was a genius, unpredictable, volatile a man who could elevate her into artistic royalty, but also drag her into chaos. With him, she experienced both the ecstasy of being seen as more than a reality star, and the agony of being tied to a storm she could not control. She tried to hold it together. For her children, for her image, for the empire. But in the quiet moments, when Kanye's battles spilled into the public eye, when their private arguments became national headlines, Kim felt the crushing reminder that her decision had stolen from her the right to keep anything sacred. Love was no longer hers. Even heartbreak belonged to the audience. And yet, the empire grew. Skims, her clothing line, became a cultural force. The world wore her designs, copied her style, lived in her shadow. Forbes placed her among the billionaires. Proof that she was not just a scandal, not just a pretty face, but a businesswoman who had outplayed the system. But still, the same question lingered. What had she sacrificed to win this game? In interviews, she laughed, she posed, she gave the world what it wanted. But in the darkness of her room, she allowed herself the honesty that she could never share. She thought of the girl she once was, the girl who wanted love, who wanted a family, who wanted to be seen for who she truly was. That girl had died the moment Kim signed her name on the papers that turned scandal into opportunity. The empire was her resurrection, but it was not a resurrection of the soul. It was a resurrection of the mask. She often thought of her father, Robert Kardashian, a man who had lived and died with a kind of dignity she admired. Would he have been proud? Would he have understood? Or would he have seen the hollowness behind the empire? Sometimes, when she looked at her children, she wondered if they would ask her the same questions one day. Would they see her as a provider, a visionary, a woman who built an empire for them? Or would they see the cracks in her story, the shame that never truly disappeared? Every fortune has its curse. For Kim, the curse was memory. She could never escape the image that started it all. No matter how many billions she earned, no matter how many accolades she collected, the world would always return to that one decision. It was her crown and her chain, the thing that gave her power, and the thing that ensured she would never be free of its shadow. Sometimes, when the cameras were gone and the house grew too quiet, she would allow herself to imagine the other path. A life where she had chosen silence, chosen to disappear into anonymity. Perhaps she would have lived in peace, without the flashing lights, without the constant judgment. Perhaps she would have married someone quietly, raised children without the world watching, grown older without the pressure of staying perfect for millions. That life was gone, a ghost of a possibility she had killed with her choice. But it haunted her still, whispering in her ear when the applause faded. Her empire was not without triumph. She had used her influence to advocate for prison reform, to study law, to push for change in a system that had wronged so many. In those moments, she felt a glimpse of redemption, a flicker of meaning. But the shadows always returned, because no matter what she did, her foundation had been built on scandal. And in a way, she wondered if that truth invalidated everything else. The decision had given her everything: fame, fortune, power beyond imagination. But it had also stolen something she could never buy back: the ability to be ordinary, to be unseen, to live without performance. She was loved by millions, and yet lived in perpetual solitude. The applause of the crowd could never replace the peace of being unknown. Kim Kardashian sits in that paradox, the queen of a kingdom she built from ashes, haunted by the choice that made her and destroyed her at the same time. She is proof of ambition's power and its cruelty. Proof that one decision can lift you to the heavens and still chain you to hell. And if you listen closely to her silence, if you watch the way her eyes linger too long on the darkness between flashes of light, you will see it. The cost, the truth, the lesson, that even the richest among us carry debts. That even the most admired carry shame. That behind every empire lies a decision too heavy for one soul to bear. Kim Kardashian bore hers. She turned shame into currency, silence into spectacle, humiliation into immortality. And though the world will remember her name for generations, she will always remember the night when the choice was placed before her, and the girl she had to bury to become the woman the world demanded. That is the cruel irony of her story. She won the world, but she lost herself.